This is Chris Ott, and I'm continuing with this series of short talks that I'm giving at the Avatar Meher Baba Circle Center, across from the Meher Center in the Myrtle Beach Mall. And I maybe have a friend who's going to join me later, and we'll have a bit of a conversation on the subjects that we're talking about today. The topic today is the future of the Baba world. Now, I gave a series of talks some time ago called Baba and the Future, but that was a different sense of the future. That series was on the future philosophers and what they'll think of Baba and how I predict that they'll be interested in Baba eventually. And I gave a prophecy at some point that Baba gave that would eventually come to pass, and not very long from now. But this is about something different. This is Baba and future, meaning the future of the Baba world. And the Baba world includes this Circle Center and the people that belong to it, and the Meher Center, and little centers all over the country and around the world. But I'm mostly thinking about in the West. And I'm going to bring up some of the issues that the Baba world faces going forward into the future, and then talk about some of the possible remedies for those. And this is kind of a big subject, so we'll see how it goes. It probably extend into more than this single talk. But my friend Ben Hay, who's going to join me, he also was born into a Baba family right here in Myrtle Beach, very associated with the Meher Center. He'll tell a little of his story. He's aware of these topics. We've talked about them before, so we'll talk about them together when he gets here, assuming that happens. He's working, so sometimes he can't break away. So before I go on, I just want to apologize for part one. The sound quality was poor, and some people were making noise in the background. And I just wanted people to realize that this time that I have from 2 o'clock till 3 o'clock on Wednesdays is reserved on the calendar for the Circle Center. And so it should be respected as, my time. It wasn't last week, but that was unusual. I don't know why that happened. But above and beyond that, this Circle Center, which is in a shopping mall in Myrtle Beach, has terrible acoustics anyway. So even if you were very quiet, I have an omnidirectional microphone, which is the worst kind of microphone for a place with a lot of room noise. But there's an air conditioner that runs here all the time, and you can't control it. It's part of the mall infrastructure. And it's quite loud on a microphone, on recording. And I'll try to adjust for that, but I can't completely without distorting my own voice a lot. So anyway, about that, just apologize. I have a little studio at home with very good acoustics, but I like the idea of doing it here because eventually I'm hoping to have guests to talk about these topics that come in here. And there's a lot of couches and things here, very, very nicely set up. So let's get into this topic. As I said, it's a complicated topic. So I've got a lot of prerequisite things to talk about before we can really get into the subject. And so it's good there's nobody else here right now. And I kind of timed it that way so that I could talk and set up this whole subject. It's a subject I've thought about a large part of my life, and given it a lot of thought, but it doesn't usually pertain to the topics that I usually do on my websites, which are about philosophy or Baba's teaching. This is about the demographics of the Baba movement, or what was once a movement, and it's the leftover of a once movement, really. let me first start by saying that there are about I would say 2,500 Baba followers in the United States, and much fewer in Europe, if we're talking about the West. There's quite a few actually in Australia. There's a few more in England. There's some even in New Zealand. There's a couple families, I'm pretty sure, as I remember. And there are some in Argentina, I've heard. But mostly, the United States is about it. And even there, they tend to be densely populated toward the coasts. And I'd say there's about 25 adult Baba followers. I would say a very high percentage of them are over 75 years old. And the number that is under 60 is very small. It's probably 250 people in the United States, and probably basically none in Europe, okay? So what you see is a kind of a movement that was going, and but it didn't continue. Now that's not just there are some reasons for that, and that's what we need to talk about, because before we can talk about would you even want to remedy that? Maybe it's good for there are some positive things about this first movement just sort of fading away, and then something else one day, somebody will get interested in Baba in a different way. That's actually something I feel very good about. Like, Baba could be understood more as a philosopher himself, or interesting to philosophers, like Buddha, than the way it's been so far, which has been more like Jesus, with followers like Christians taking him as God, and having pictures everywhere of him, thinking of him, singing songs to him. That's very like the Christians of the catacombs. That's what has been. So we may be a whole different take on Baba in the future. I don't know. There's no way to know. Only God knows. But let's talk about this demographic decline. Why are there 2,500 older people and about 250 people under 60, which they call young people, literally? They have a young adult Sahabas here, and it includes like 50-year-olds at the center, because a young person is a person under 60 here. I'm considered young, even though I'm over 60. They constantly tell me I'm one of the young people. So that shows to be overly dramatic. It's an extinction event that's dying out. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because when something goes, it makes way for something in the future. And I'm always talking about the future, if anybody who follows me. So now, if you have that many old people, and that few people the age of who would be their children, understand these people didn't live lives of stoic asceticism and celibacy. They got married when they were in their 20s, in the 1970s and the 80s. They came to Baba in the 60s and 70s, and then they were very young, and then they got married, and they had children, and probably average replacement of themselves. So there should be even more young people, because when I say 2,500, I'm taking into account people who have died over the decades. So there should be about 2,500 old people and at least 2,500 young people who would be their kids. That's just a demographic fact. But that's not the case, which shows that their kids did not follow Baba. They did not, they all, you could call it rebelled, or just weren't interested, or wandered away. They had no interest in even finding out in a deep way what Baba taught. Now, there are many theories why that is. And my daughter, luckily, she's 29, and so we've had a lot of conversations about it. And Ben is about 49, and we've talked a lot about it. And different people who grew up in Baba, who are Baba followers, they have different theories why there was this attrition. And so I'm going to have to convey some of those, and if we ever get more people joining us here, they may have their own theories. Some of these theories might even shock you, but I'm going to share them anyway, just to show you how people are kind of stumped. I have a friend, Christina Riley. She's about my age. She also grew up from birth in Baba, and her father was also an artist. We both come from Woodstock. We have a lot in common. She believes that the Baba people that came to Baba have something wrong with them, and she actually has a theory they generally have had a head injury some point in their childhood, and therefore could not process what Baba was saying and convey it to their children. I think she delights me with her gall, but that's one theory, that it's a problem of head injuries or some other, or possibly trauma, or various emotional traumas. There's something wrong with these people. Because she does the workshops where she tries to explain Baba's teaching, and she finds it's very difficult for them to follow. She and I have had a lot of very deep conversations, so we're pretty much right on the same page about what Baba did teach, how he's misunderstood, and we're both working on trying to improve that, her in her way through her seminars. It's very impressive. I could never do that. And then me with my talks online and my books. But my books aren't directly on Baba usually, but I did do a full talk series of 23 videos called What Meher Baba Taught, What Meher Baba Really Taught and Why It Matters. And that's online. And I'm going to be covering some of that actually in this talk series. I'm going to be covering a few of those points again, because that was for a general audience, and this is very specific for the family, the Baba family. So another theory. Let's see. Ben told me a theory yesterday, but I forget what it was. If he comes in today, he'll talk about that. But my own theory has been that why the kids didn't follow Baba is because their parents didn't really understand Baba themselves. And I understand when I say their parents, and I talk about the 2,500 people, they all came together, they're all about the same age, they were hippies. They were that generation, the hippie people. And they were all born within about 5 years of each other, largely on the Northeast. About a huge percentage of them were from Jewish families, which you could psychoanalyze why that is. One explanation for that is that Jewish people grow up without an avatar to love, like Jesus. And a friend of mine, very close friend, she said, she grew up Jewish in Brooklyn or wherever she was. She said she used to wish they could have a Christmas tree. So there may be something that Jewish people finally had an avatar of their own. I find that very sweet. So none of this is meant to criticize. It's just we're just looking at the demographic facts. Ben and who's 49, my daughter who's 29, they even know this generation that left better than I do. They're literally their friends. There's a program at the Mayor Center called the Youth Harvest, and both of them attended it, and that's where young people get sent, and then they hear about Baba at the center, and they stay at a camp. But most of those kids drift away. They had a good time, they remember it, some of the friendships last, but they're not interested in Baba. So why is that? That's what I'm going to be talking about. And then I'm going to talk about how we can correct it. I feel or maybe we don't want to. Maybe there's something else. But there has to be done so it doesn't just repeat itself. Okay, so why did they not understand Baba? Right. I'm going to give a quote. I've given this quote many, many times. He said, "I have come to bring about a revolution in man's thinking, the slowest of all revolutions." Okay, so while that's very brief, you can unpack that, and there's a lot in it. First of all, we're talking about a revolution. That means something that hadn't been thought before. We're not just talking about a rehashing of the same old way of thinking about God and so forth, but a revolution in the thinking. And it's not just a feeling revolution. You see, in the 60s, they had these things called love-ins and be-ins, and everything was kind of a happening, and it was all on a kind of emotional level. But he's referring to the intellect, a revolution in man's thinking. And then the slowest of all revolutions, that does imply that it takes generations, because when there's a change in consciousness and the way people think, that just doesn't happen. That has to be developed in some people, and as they know it, understand it better, they pass it to their children, who then pass it to their children, and it may develop over time clearer and clearer. I have a paper called How Ideas Get Disseminated into the World, and there's a whole process, from history where a prophet or a Messiah like Jesus comes and he gives a message, but it isn't immediately understood and digested. Although there's an immediate response, it first passes through various hands, and you have philosophers take it up and they give it an interpretation. For instance, after Jesus, was Augustine, who Baba said was one of his favorite saints. So it's not somebody Baba dismissed. And he was a philosopher. And he basically created the understanding of Christianity that we have, both in all branches, in Orthodox and in Catholic and in Protestant. It's all from Augustine of Hippo, which is in Egypt. And he wrote over 100 books. But then, not everybody can understand philosophy. Philosophy is very heady and hard to read, but some do, and then I think the next phase is the artists. But when I say artists, I don't just mean painters, I mean poets and playwrights, and in our time, filmmakers and ballets and all kinds. Look at all the ways that the story of Jesus and his message has been conveyed to us through the arts. It has, been through painting, but it's also been through movies. I just saw a beautiful program streaming called they're still making it. They're in the last season, making the last season. It's called The Chosen, and it's the story of Jesus told through the point of view of his disciples. They're the chosen that he goes around gathering, and it's very moving. But once again, we're still learning the message of Jesus and digesting it, and every time that happens, it's a little bit of a new interpretation too. It has a kind of a new flavor. And that story, The Chosen, which I really liked, it has a lot of people watch it that are not Christian. It's just so entertaining. But if it has criticism, it's from Christians, because it's different, and they're used to things being the same. So it's interesting. So, in a sense, Jesus also brought about a change in man's thinking, the slowest of all revolutions, because it was a change to the idea of instead of an eye for an eye, remember, he taught love thine enemies and sacrifice from yourself, and so if someone asks you to walk a mile, walk two. It's very, very challenging, dramatic teaching, and our values are very much shaped by that today in the Western world. Now let's get to this thing of where people don't understand Baba. First of all, if God speaks is very hard to understand. And there are other books. The Discourse is a bit easier. But they are hard, and his concepts are difficult. So it's no shame that anybody would get confused by them. But the way you get confused is that when you hear a new idea, when you're an adult, you already have a lot of tapes playing in your head about all the words in that new thing. And so when you hear it, you try to incorporate it in with all those other thoughts and opinions you've heard. And you have to do that, otherwise your head would just be a jumble. So if Baba says the word God, well, without you realizing it, a whole bunch of concepts come to mind. What do you think about God? And then he says soul, and you got a whole bunch of ideas about souls. These are common words, by the time you're an adult. And so you're trying to understand them that way, in terms of how you understand those words. The problem is that very often Baba isn't using those words like that, the way they have been used in the past, and I'll explain what I mean in a moment. Ideally, you'd hear some of these things real early before you already picked up all the noise of the environment, and so that you just heard Baba, and then you could hear new things and you could compare it to what you heard Baba said. But the problem is, the Baba lovers, when they came to Baba, they were already adult, and some of them were young adults. Some of them were 18, 20 years old, some were older. But you already have acquired an enormous amount of memories, especially about things like souls and God and so forth, reincarnation. You assume you know what Baba means by that. And especially the kind of people that came to Baba in the 60s and 70s, they tended to think of themselves as seekers, so they had read certain books like Edgar Cayce and Blavatsky and Alice Bailey and things like that, trying to get what they thought was mysticism. So by the time they heard Baba, they were kind of incorporating it in with all that stuff, and actually it was quite different. So I'm going to give some examples. I heard somebody once say, Baba has a radical form of monotheism. Actually, Baba doesn't teach monotheism at all. Nowhere will you ever find Baba use the word monotheism. The one who had a radical form of monotheism is Muhammad, and Islam is the most radical form of monotheism that there is. And but Baba goes even further than monotheism, and I'm going to Baba even. Monotheism is the belief that there is one God. And when we say God, we really mean a God, like gods from the time of polytheism. But in monotheism, they're saying, well, there's really only one of those. And I'm going to tell you two sentences, and I'm going to point out the difference. It's very subtle. It has to do with one word, actually. The difference between me saying, I believe there is God. Okay? Now here's another sentence. This is a monotheistic sentence that I'm about to say. I believe there is a God. Okay, the word which is just one letter, is a indefinite article. And when you add that to the noun God, it makes it a discrete object, and there amongst other discrete objects. I believe that there is a God. So where's this? There's a God. I mean, here's a cup, but on top of that, there's a God. Well, that's monotheism. Baba never talks about a God. People will sit around and go, do you believe in a God? It's so funny that you have that word on there. Although sometimes they just say, do you believe in God? Well, this is what Baba teaches. Not only does one who understands Baba and has read his books believe in God, but he believes there's only God. So I have a line I like, and I've said it before, and my daughter says it's kind of my cogito or something. There is no God, there's only God. Okay, that's what Baba teaches. And we are that. Okay, that's what we are. And so is a cockroach. So is a plant. There is only God. And it is the self in every apparently separate finite self. It's the infinite real self in the apparent finite separate selves. So, when he says, you and I are not we, but one, what he means is, while it appears that there's a you and an I, in reality there's only one here, and that's God. Now, let me show you another way in which you could teach Baba wrong. One would be saying Baba is a radical monotheist. No, Baba teaches something very unique, something new. I mean, I don't know any other avatar that taught there's only God. Now, you could interpret what they said as meaning that, and the mystics probably did. I'm not an expert on all the mysticism schools of all the religions, but it seems like that probably is there in them as an interpretation. But Baba is very explicit about it. Baba says many times, there's only God, all else is illusion. God is the witness, the seer, the self in every self, okay? He's not all this crap that we see. That's phenomena. That's an illusion. That doesn't even exist. That's a zero. The reality is that which we can't see, which is the seer. Just like an eye can't see itself. But anyway, so there's another radical thing, and that is a lot of times when we're telling somebody about Baba, we start out kind of the wrong end. We say something that Baba did say, and that's good, and we're trying to remember what he taught, but it's not very helpful when you're trying to explain Baba. And that is when I say to you, yes, we are Baba lovers, and you say, Mayor Baba is God. Well, that comes off really bad, okay? And it's actually not what Baba taught, even though he did say, I am God, because there's a state of consciousness which you experience yourself as God, which he explains, and that's called the seventh plane. And every one of us eventually attains that state of consciousness, but he's in that state, so he says, I am God. As a matter of fact, it's a particular state, the Anal Haq state. He's like, I am in the I am God, conscious I am God state. But when you say Mayor Baba is God, we believe Mayor Baba is God, you're kind of implying that only Baba is God. But the fact is that it's totally consistent with Baba's teaching to start out by saying, do you know that I'm a Baba lover? We believe that Jerry Seinfeld is God in human form. Because we do. That is what Baba taught. Jerry Seinfeld, who's a living person, a comedian, is God in human form. And I am God in human form. And if you're out there listening to this, you're God in human form. And if there's a cockroach running across the floor, that's God in a cockroach form. So you see how misleading it is just to start with Mayor Baba is God. Or Mayor Baba is the avatar. That's actually better than Mayor Baba is God, because it's clear it's God in a special sense, which is actually what Baba says in the discourses, that he is the avatar of God in a special sense. And the word special sense has been noticed by a lot of scholars as important. So I wanted to point that out. So if you just teach a few of these little one-liner zingers to your kids, and they will leave with a very distorted thing that they can't even put together once they try to get on the school bus and listen to the other kids. and try to make it all work in their head, and they better keep their mouth shut, or they go, well, Baba is God, or he is the avatar. It's not the best place to start, okay? Because you're going to be misinterpreted as having Asperger's, which means, well, they say it's not a real diagnosis anymore, but it's a word we still use. It means a person who doesn't get normal social cues, and so they don't know how to fit in with people. Well, that's what your kids will be like if that's all that you give them of Baba. So how can you teach them? It's all so complicated, right? No, it's actually not. And I've told it many times, but people, they don't take me seriously. They just, oh, Chris, I don't know, he's saying something, I don't know. There's a cartoon of Homer Simpson talking to his dog, and it's through the point of view of the dog, and Homer's going roar, 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 roar. It's funny, but I think people just sort of hear me going roar, roar. But it's really a real thing what I'm about to say, what I'm trying to get at. There is a way to teach kids about Baba, but kids weren't taught that way. Why? Because they didn't even know this about Baba. They hadn't been taught when they were little kids, and they're still trying to figure it out what Baba taught. So, first of all, most people with kids who are Baba lovers feel uncomfortable with the amount they understand Baba themselves, and so they're worried about messing it up, and they probably will. So it's kind of a justifiable concern. And inevitably, they if they do try, they probably do mess it up. But anyway, let me explain why this is a problem when you get out in the world. So let's say your kid, your dad was a Baba lover, and he was a professor, and he was very smart, and you admired him, and he told you a few things about Baba, probably a little sheepishly, because it does sound kind of silly without giving some kind of context. But anyway, you go off and you go to college, and you taking a class, and it's explaining Charles Darwin. And you thought that because Baba is God, Baba must have said that he created God, the world. Because didn't God make the world? That's sort of the main reason they even invented God, isn't it? To have an explanation for the world. Well, you can look into that. That actually, there's a case for that. So, but Baba didn't say that. And Baba has a different account for how the world got here. But you thought he believed that Baba made the world. So you're sitting there in your Darwin class, and you go, wow, this really makes a lot of sense about the natural selection. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. So you don't even tell anybody, but you've left, okay? And this happens but it doesn't have to be at college. It could be, junior high. My daughter went over to some people's house when she was a teenager, and there were some other teenage kids, the kids of the people, and they were Baba lovers, the family. And one of the kids, a boy, he was a teenager. He said, "I don't believe in Baba anymore," and so they all were interested. They said, "Oh, well, what do you believe now?" And he said, "Well, I believe we were seeded by aliens." So it's very funny because you kind of get that from TV. They have this show, Ancient Aliens. I'm always ranting about it because I find it such an absurd show. But but the thing is, it's better than the idea that Baba made the world. That's pretty it doesn't really work. If Baba made the world, then wouldn't they have figured this out like a long time ago that Baba made the world? And we're anyway. But now I'm going to tell you another story. When my daughter was very young, and I've told this several times, I'm going to tell it again, forgive me. But it's kind of my theme, and it's the whole theme of, it's what I want to leave when I die, is this point. So it's not just being a broken record, I'm deliberately a broken record. Well, it was a story my father told me. I told that in the part one. When I was a little boy, my father told me the story of, in the beginning, God was asleep, and then God woke and he said, "Who am I?" And his first answer was, I am stone. And they said, no, I'm not stone, who am I? And then his answer was, I'm a tree, and this, and then it was, I'm a fish, I'm a bird, I'm a mammal. And then I am man. And then finally he realized, oh, I know, I'm not a man, I'm God. So it gets back to where it was. It didn't really go anywhere. It was all just a dream God had to know himself. He woke, and he got more and more and more awake through evolution. And then as a human being, he achieves that original state, but consciously. And so it's a journey from God unconscious to a journey of God conscious. That's very simple. You can actually tell that to a 5-year-old kid, and they will get it. If you're in a cheerful, fun mood, and maybe use pictures or drawings or use that chart that I have, that's in God Speaks, everybody can get it. So so my dad told me that story when I was 5. I'm a big cheese wobbler lover, aren't I? Now, Darwinism never scared me. I made all A's in anthropology, and I made an A in physical anthropology, which is those Australopithecus ampharensis stuff. Totally loved it. I could totally get it, and I totally believe those were the stages of evolution. The only difference is the control mechanism, which I've talked about elsewhere. It's the only difference Baba made, but it's very, very important difference. And it holds up better to the fossil record than Darwin's theory, and I'm not going to repeat all that. But you go in with that understanding of that story into a college class of chemistry and all the sciences and physics, and you will not fall apart. You will not feel embarrassed. You don't have to tell your teacher anything. You can be cool. But I want to tell another story that's the counterpart to the boy who said he left Baba, and he was like 13 or something, and now he believes that we were seeded by the aliens. Okay, my daughter, I told the same story that my father told me when she was 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, because I had a chart over the couch. And we would go, hey, you want to do the chart? We would pull down the chart, and we would have fun doing it because we turned it into kind of a board game. And anyway, she had that thing down. So when she was graduating high school, she just had always wanted to go to New York, and she always wanted to go to college. I told her to be a hair beautician, to get a degree in cosmetology, and she started crying, and I was like, oh, I'm sorry, you do what you want. So we sent her to, you don't need to know that whole story. She went to Brooklyn College, and she became very like a cool New Yorker, and she married an engineer, and she got in with the kind of the jet setters, and he was Dominican, so they were flying to Dominican Republic a lot, and they had money, and sometimes they didn't have money. But anyway, she was out with her husband, and they were at a bar in Manhattan, and like the West Side or something, or maybe someplace posh. I guess that's the lower avenues, with Wall Street and stuff, because he had Wall Street friends, so these weren't a bunch of rednecks. They were smart people and educated. Anyway, they went around the idea came to go around the table and everybody give their account on the meaning of life, the whole theme of life. Like, put it all together. And so they took turns going around, and everybody did their best shot explaining the universe and what we're doing here and everything. And it came to my daughter Megan. And so she gave her account. And what story did she tell? Well, obviously the story that we went over and over and over and over. That actually I got it from my dad in 1964, and he got it from a book by Brabazon, Francis Brabazon, that Brabazon wrote on Baba's order to write that book. And I gave the source and everything. And so this starts with Baba, to God Speaks, to Francis Brabazon, who wrote a book on the theme of God Speaks, and then to my father, who then simplified it for me. See, at the time, my father told me they didn't have that chart from God Speaks where you see the animals and everything. That hadn't been done yet. That was in the second edition. But he was telling me in 1964, the seventh edition only came out posthumously in about 1973. So he just told me, but he was blind, so he couldn't point to a chart anyway. It was about bedtime stories. All my bedtime stories were in the dark. But I got it, and I still get it. And so anyway, she tells this story, and they're all listening. She doesn't know what's going to happen when she gets to the end, where God realized he was God. And she gets to the end, and everybody goes, whoa. That's called bringing down the house. Okay, hers was the best story because it is good. It's the opposite of being embarrassed. You see, this whole sad story of the drifting away from Baba was all because we were embarrassed. Okay, because we didn't understand Baba. Now I'm going to explain a little more about what I mean by not understanding and the difference here. But because we didn't understand Baba, we were kind of embarrassed to tell our kids. And then when we told our kids, then they left and they were kind of embarrassed to say what they thought. But you take a kid who has it taught to them pretty well. I mean, I'm not saying it's everything, but it's something. It holds together. Okay, that kid's not only not embarrassed, but has no reason to be embarrassed. They would be silly to run around talking about God and stuff all the time. People think they're insane. But if it comes up in a bar and everybody's going around the table telling the theme of life, then give it your best shot. Tell them to, fire with both barrels and see what happens, because it's not silly. I did tell this story once to a person, Rick Mobbs. Megan knows who that is if she ever watches this video. And when I was done, he said, is that a metaphor? And I was always disappointed. Other people have thought that, is this a metaphor? No, it's not a metaphor. It's a literal story that God woke up. This universe is more like the metaphor, like the myth that we live in, the dream. But that is literal. God literally exists. This sort of half just exists apparently, so you have to qualify its existence. Okay, so let me say something about that story now. Why that story conveys Baba's teaching better than even a longer, more complicated account of Baba's teaching. You see, Baba didn't actually teach that you're a soul thing and that you leave a corpse when it dies and then you float and you look kind of like in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and then you find parents and then you go into the womb. That's not what he taught. That you'll find that in a lot of teachings. That the soul is like a little lizard that leaves the corpse and finds a new body and it kind of invades that and lives inside there, and I've got a soul inside my body. That's not Baba's teaching. This is going to freak some people out, but it's the same thing I was saying about God. Your soul is God. There's only one soul. The difference, the separate souls, Baba talks about souls. That's how all souls is the first word in God Speaks, the first phrase. But like the second sentence says, all souls are one. There really is only one soul. All souls are the oversoul. There's not a bunch of souls. The sense that you have of being an individual self, which you could call your soul, your identity, is something that is produced by these impressions that you gather over evolution and reincarnation. And those form in you a concept of Chris I. Chris is the guy who lives up the hill a ways in Briarcliff West in that apartment, and Chris is the one who used to be married to so-and-so. And I am Chris, okay? I identify with all those impressions and all those memories. That's me. But really, it's God who, through those impressions, takes himself to be all that. But really, God is God. There's only God. So there's really only one self. And Baba refers to it as the self with a capital S. So every individual self, apparently separate, is really the self with a capital S. So the self with a capital S is the self that abides in every smaller self with a small s. So when I tell the story of God, originally was unconscious, and then he was asleep, and then he woke and wanted to know who he was, because what is there? There's only him that exists, okay? But he's looking for himself, for his identity. So Baba phrases that as the original question, who am I? And that's resonating through the universe constantly. Who am I? Who am I? And so God first thinks he's a stone, but God imagines himself as a stone, and then he thinks he's a plant, and imagines himself as every kind of plant. But notice that God's not going anywhere. He's not going into the plant. He's imagining being the plant. And this is a very critical and important difference. This is a subjective experience by who? God. Okay? The dreamer, the witness, the one self. And that one self, over and over, it experiences himself passing through this journey. But it's the same self apparently doing it again and again. And you can think of that as like you drop a pebble in a pool, and it sends out a ripple, and then it sends out another ripple, and another ripple. And so it goes on reverberating forever. And Baba gives the analogy of the mischievous chicken. And this is where the first soul that went looking for itself, and when we say soul, it is the oversoul, but it experiences itself as an individual soul. And that first sense of individuality occurred, and this first soul emerged from the oversoul, you can say, and passes through this journey, the constant stream of life, Baba calls it, and eventually answers the question, I am God. And that first soul who did that was the avatar. And when the avatar turned around, once he was realized, looked at the universe, it was full of souls that had followed him. Because he had gone off with this question, and like I said, the ripples followed and followed him. And then he realized he was responsible for creating the universe by just trying to answer the question, who am I, with the final answer, I am God. And so he had to help all those little brothers get that answer too. And it happened. So this is an eternal sort of repercussion of that original desire of God to know himself. And that first soul is the avatar, and that is who Baba says was Jesus, was Ram, was Krishna, was Buddha, was Muhammad, and now is Meher Baba, and many, many, many before. So now there's Baba's teaching. But the difference here is that I didn't have to say all that, what I just said, to a kid. Because I already explained that in the beginning, God asked, who am I? And see, Megan and I would sit with the chart, and he would have all these wrong answers on the way to the correct answer at the end. But she got that. She didn't need a bunch of verbose philosophizing about souls and apparency and reality. She just needed the story. And we would look at the pictures, and then we would always say she was the ballerina. Well, she wanted to be the ballerina. I wasn't being a sexist. I would have been happy to be the ballerina. So I get it, I've been men and women, but that's more than she needed to think about. So I was the cowboy, because there's a picture of a cowboy when you see the people in the poster, if you look real close. And that we had fun doing that. So we got it that, these were people like us. That we had been these people. We had been I probably have been a cowboy and a ballerina, probably a horse thief, but that's still a cowboy nonetheless. But I don't know to what extent that was clear, but that and all the other times I've said the same thing, I think it'll become clear. And that kind of sums up what I wanted to say today. It's kind of an extension of what I said in part one. It's just a little more elaborate. But it's the continuation of what happened after my dad told me that story when I was maybe 5 years old. So, thank you for watching. I'm hoping that my friend Ben will show up, and then I'll turn the camera and he and I will talk about these same topics if he comes. If he doesn't, that's the show. And I'll see you all next Wednesday. Thank you very much. Take care. Okay, I think we're good. So now, I'll introduce us. No, it's fine. There. Okay, it's on. So, we're back, and I'm back, and I'm here with Ben Hay, and I'll let him introduce himself and tell a little about himself. And I've already been introduced the subject matter, which is I gave a series of talks. You came to some, I think. It was 2015, I think it was 10 years ago. And that was on Baba and the future. And what I was talking about was, I was quoting Baba saying philosophers will come. So it was about what philosophers will think of Baba's teaching. But this is the Baba's future in a different sense, which is about the future of the Baba family, the Baba movement, or if there isn't even a Baba movement anymore and it fades away, what will come after it? Just the future that way. And we are, I want you to talk about yourself. Just so that somebody who doesn't know will know a little about you. Most local people do know Ben because he grew up here. But we are really good examples of the Baba family.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me here today. Always a pleasure to be with you, and it's always an honor to be on one of your productions and your works. You've done fantastic work over the years. I'm a huge fan of you personally, and I love the work that you do as well. For those out there that haven't watched Chris before, I think he's one of the most sincere artists in the Baba world, kind of talking about his experience, talking about Meher Baba, sort of touching on aspects that oftentimes don't get much attention. So thank you. I just want to share that with you. My name is Benjamin Hay. You guys should know who I am. If you don't, then you have a problem. So, no, just kidding.
Tell you go ahead and say who your dad was.
Yeah.
Because I talked about my dad in in part one.
So my father was Marshall Hay. Many of you know Marshall Hay as well. He, unfortunately he's no longer with us, but he was, a very active Baba lover, an old timer, and very involved, of course, the early days of the center. And
I think he was one of the very first of that generation I'm always talking about.
Yes.
That showed up in 1967.
66.
In fact, he came in 66. And I talk about them as a hippie generation, but you say he wouldn't have identified exactly that way. Although most people would think of him that way, right?
Yeah.
In what way was he not part of the hippie movement?
So my father, was sort of, like a lot of Baba lovers, that generation. And this is something that's quite interesting. You know, he lost his father at a relatively early age, and you know, when he was, I think, just going into college, I want to say. So, you know, he was definitely. My father was, you know, very bright. He had gotten a scholarship to Princeton, and I want to say he scored almost perfect on his SATs, but he got into a little trouble before the year started and lost that, and essentially got kicked out of Princeton, and ended up, the only school that would take him was University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and that was because that's where he was from. You know, he was from North Carolina originally, and so his grandmother still lived there. He was able to claim residency there, and so he went to school there. And of course, you know, in hindsight, it was all Bob was doing, but he was not a hippie as much as he was, I guess. He got into drugs, but he was not into the hippie scene. This would have been early on. This would have been like 63, 64.
Well, the hippie scene kind of got started in '67 in the Summer of Love.
Yeah, like that component of it. So he was more of a beatnik, and then of course, you know, so he was protesting against the Vietnam War, I think in like '64 or something, when basically there was advisors there. Like hardly anybody even knew about it. They couldn't point it on a map, right? So he was sort of an early adapter to that, but he went through that phase relatively early on, and you know, he had also gotten his drug thing out of the way fairly early on as well, and ended up back here in Myrtle Beach where my grandmother was living, and then she, you know, Marshall had sort of gone through his drug experience, had that experience down in Mexico, got quite ill, ended up here back in Myrtle Beach, and had a job up the road at Hardee's in downtown Myrtle Beach, and that's where he, of course, heard about Mayor Baba, and then ended up at the center the next day. And I know many of you already know his story, but
that's before, like busloads of them started coming from Chapel Hill. He was here earlier.
Yes, yeah. So
he's kind of who brought them here, right?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So he was, because he had this connection to Chapel Hill, and that connection was still active with his friends and his, you know, classmates, and who many who are now, you know, still with us as Baba lovers. He would go back and tell people about Meher Baba, and it was
at Chapel Hill.
At Chapel Hill, it was almost part of, I don't want to say it was part of his job, but it was, you know, it was something that Elizabeth, you know, encouraged.
Elizabeth is the one who founded the Meher Center, which
Yes.
is near here. So.
And so, you know, and then eventually he did go back and go to school and graduate, and he would come back and work on the weekends at the center.
So now let's get into this topic, because the topic was, I said something that was a little bit, somebody might go, you must be making that up. So kind of, here, Bartley, back me up. But I'm going to just give I told you this over the phone, my opinion on you can, my demographics of the Baba world is that there were about 3,000 maybe Baba lovers in the 80s, say. And then now you'd say that because some have died, those, and that's who I call the hippies, but they weren't all hippies, and that's not meant to be so derogatory. It's a fact about the history, okay? Yeah. And so now there's about 2,500 people, I said, over 75, and then there's about 250 people, about a tenth of that's under 60.
Yes.
And you and I said you're 49 and I'm 65, we're considered young people here. And so, and I also mentioned about the youth sahabas that happens at the center, and teenage kids of Baba people go to this summer camp, and the parents seem to hope they'll have some kind of experience and they'll be connected with Baba in some way, but it doesn't usually take. And so I've said, now, if you had 3,000 people about the same age. I said they're all within about 5 years of each other, that first wave. And they weren't celibate, they got married in the 70s and 80s. They should have about replaced their population. So there really should be about 3,000 young people, like in their 30s and 40s today, but there aren't. So the question is, well, what I wanted to say is they didn't stick. They just they drifted off. And that happens in churches too. That happens in Christian churches, and they talk about it there too, they say. And then I brought up the idea of there are theories for this. I said that different friends of mine have different theories. Like I told Christina Riley, I explained who she is, and said her belief is that the Baba lovers of the hippie generation had head injuries. Just a coincidence. And so they couldn't understand Baba, and so obviously their kids, they couldn't explain it to their kids. And the other possibility, it wasn't head injuries, it was severe emotional trauma from something.
There you go. I think
that I think you were telling me something like that last night.
Yes.
And then my theory was it could have been explained better, but I don't, and then I talked about that, and I went through how I think it could have been explained, but if you tell your kid, one of my things was like, tell your kid Baba is God and he made the world, and then put him on a school bus, at like 10 years old.
Yeah.
He's not going to stay a Baba lover because they're going to beat the crap out of him if he opens his mouth. It's not going to go over well.
Yeah.
And so my theory is how Baba was taught. So let's first of all, I need you to give me some verification for the audience, because it doesn't sound believable. What do you think of my 250 people under 60?
You might be spot on. I don't know if there's been what we'd call a census in the Baba world, and I think one of the challenges is, this is something that we've discussed as well, how would you do a census?
Because a lot of people don't agree what a Baba lover is.
A lot of people, and
or even if there is such a thing.
Yes. So, but I think maybe most people could agree in that, people that are what we'd call active participants within the Baba world, what does that constitute? Maybe, coming to a center or some center once every few years, or, I don't know. I mean, but you might not be far off, is what I'm saying.
Okay. I've had this discussion with my daughter, who's 29. I said that before. And she said, no, Dad, it's more. And then she even tried to count.
Yeah.
And it came kind of like to what I'm saying.
Yeah. You might be accurate. I mean, I think, look, and you've experienced this too, Chris.
Yeah.
Anytime you're going to live essentially either on or right next to a Baba center, whether you're in India or whether you're here in Myrtle Beach or somewhere else, which, is a draw for lots of people, you've seen so many people come and you've seen so many people go over the years. And you've seen people show up with a bang, and
it's amazing. You
never hear from them again.
Yeah. A lot of them that stayed, though, of that initial group.
Yes.
I mean, I can even name some of the people that left.
Yes.
But of the young, it's hard for me to even name people that didn't. I want to address something I forgot to address before in my little section. There's a thing that when you bring up this subject with some Baba lovers that are older, like the 75-year-old the mean average, their kids usually, very often, didn't continue to follow Baba, and I think they're embarrassed about that a little. Yes. They think you're going to judge them. So they say this, they go, what is a Baba lover? Yeah. Now, that's actually not real sophistication. It's a rhetorical question, It's supposed to make the point that there's no such thing or we don't know. And that's kind of like me saying to you, you say, I heard that you might be a pedophile. And I go, what is a pedophile? That kind of implies I'm a pedophile.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm defensive.
Yeah.
So there's a new thing. I only recently noticed it. It's part of AI.
Yeah.
You can just go to any browser and just type a question, and AI will answer it, and it'll say AI at the top of it.
Really?
So I looked up, like, what is a Bible lover? Because, like a pedophile, I look it up, that's somebody that messes with children inappropriately, and that'll be easy to prove that they're BSing me.
Yeah.
Because I can look this up, and it says I like this one. There's a few different answers depending on which browser you use and how you ask the question. But it says here, Baba is the name of a well-known spiritual leader, Meher Baba, and a Baba lover would be someone who follows his teachings and way of life.
Pretty good.
That's a pretty good definition.
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
Yeah. I've never used AI, not once.
No, neither. Just for this, because I needed to have a definition.
Yeah.
I just wanted to prove it's not impossible to define what a Baba
I watched too many science fiction movies in the 70s and the 80s to I have a fear of using AI now. It's going to take me a while to get over it. So.
I'm a little ashamed that I just did that, because normally I do give lectures about AI.
Yeah.
That
No, but I think for clarification, because, and I think it's good, we've talked a lot about what normal is, right? So I think there's, establishing a little bit of a baseline there, like
that
a
word.
common understanding.
Right.
Yeah, it can be helpful sometimes.
Like,
Yeah.
if your kid just can't stand Baba,
Yeah.
they're probably not a Baba
They
lover.
might not be a Bible lover.
If they don't know a thing about what
Yeah.
he's taught and don't want to know,
Yeah.
because they get angry if
Yeah.
you bring it up, they're probably not a Baba
Yeah, if they're
lover.
breaking windows and sabotaging your car because they don't want to come
because
on the retreat.
That's right. When
Yeah.
they start yelling because you said they really are a Baba lover, they're probably not a Baba lover. You need
Now,
to let them go.
Full disclaimer. Baba works in amazing ways, and there's a possibility they could
be repressed Baba lovers.
be repressed Baba lovers and become Baba lovers.
Well, there's this.
But I wouldn't put money on it.
There's this thing that some of these analysts we
Yeah.
listen to, because we're both into geopolitics a lot.
Yeah.
They say that there's this. It's actually a line from Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
In every, I'm going to have to bleep out a word.
Uh-huh.
In every, there's an American trying to get out. It's the idea that.
Yeah, of course, they just want to be Americans. And
Yeah.
just need to be
So my
liberated,
kid is really a Baba lover, but he
Yeah.
just doesn't know it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Viet Cong.
Yeah, something is very baby boomerish about that. I don't know what, but
I don't know.
yeah.
Okay, well.
Yeah, but
So-
I think you make a point, and I think what the point is, and again, I can maybe use my example to pull from a little bit. Is me and my wife and my two children are the only
Oh yeah.
married family here in Myrtle Beach,
Yeah, this is where it gets personal.
and so
Literally, the only nuclear family with children in Myrtle Beach.
yes, we're all involved, right?
Married couple with
Yes.
children.
And so that's interesting because
I mean, in the town, there's lots, but he means as in the Baba community, the Baba family.
yes,
I mean, your wife actually works at the Mayor's Center,
she does. Yes,
and you grew up close to the center, right outside it, just like I did.
we grew up just
Very
two
similar.
houses down from each other.
Very, very similar.
Yeah.
Same neighborhood.
So
But we're about 16 years apart, so we had a lot of the same life experiences. It's just kind of interesting.
we did. Yeah, we went to the same college. We had a lot of the same situations. Where
Didn't you go to Myrtle Beach High?
Myrtle Beach High. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
But I was born here, though. I was born in Myrtle Beach at the old hospital.
right. But the older I get, the more it feels like I was born here.
You might have.
I used to think. No, I mean, when I was young, I kind of identified inside as a Yankee, and like, what am I doing in the dumb South? Now, I'm very pleased to be in the South. I'm very proud to be a Southerner.
Well, you should be. You should be. You know the old cigarette ad? You've come a long way, baby. You've come a long way, baby.
Okay, so you don't have that much time. You've got to get back to work.
Yes. Talk about family. If I don't, then you know.
Okay, so
But
next time.
But
Go ahead.
I want to just continue with this point.
We have lots of time.
Yeah, because you know we're talking about this. We're on this particular subject, and I think that is, is something very important for people to recognize, is that this was something that I personally, and I can't speak for you, but I would never have imagined. We were always told that the Baba community and the Baba family was going to expect it to grow.
Something I need to say.
Yeah.
If you read Baba's teachings, no matter what some people claim about them, you read the Discourses by Mir Baba, which is one of his most important books with actual teachings in them. Baba teaches a very, very traditional life.
That's true.
With families and fathers, making a living, and mothers being nurturing, and that he literally uses the word nurturing, and fathers shouldering the burden, of their family.
Yes, as I sit here in my tie.
That's a tie. That's how you shoulder
this
it.
This is a tie. I'm actually at work today in my office, but I think that is kind of a rarity in the Baba world.
So you and I both have shared that we assumed we were going to end up with families, but with other families, that it was going to be another generation in a very traditional sense in the Baba world.
It was very much spoken of in the context of a movement.
Oh, talk about that.
Yeah, so we were at the precipice of a movement. We were moving forward and we were growing, and thousands upon thousands would sort of. Now, this was never written down and shown to me or anything like that. It was just sort of presumed almost.
Yeah, you absorbed it like a sponge from.
No, I didn't hear that directly from my parents, but just in the general sort of theme of the Baba world and where things were at that time. And so
there was a real disappointment in a way for us. Me, I was disappointed that it turned out there wasn't hardly anybody for me to marry and that wanted.
Well, you were definitely, so in your age bracket, when you were younger, there
were about 8 Baba lovers.
Yes.
My age.
Yes.
In the country.
In the country. So there was much, in terms of the pool of girls to pull from, there was a lot less. I was fortunate in that, there was a lot more kids my age, and they
But they didn't end up wanting family and stuff, did they? Most of them?
Some did, some did not. I think when we were young, though, I think the answer to that was probably no. I would tell you that very few people actually spoke about family when we were young. That was something that was not emphasized. You would never hear about that really in the Baba world or spoken about. There was. Look, I mean, let's face it. We were kids, and your parents were older, but.
That's basically very similar.
But yeah, you're I mean.
Face what?
We were children of people that were essentially rebelling against the norms of the time, the traditions of the times. Yes, the 50s.
Yeah.
And so they set up a particular.
My mother used to refer to it in a derogatory way. She didn't talk about the 50s because she's a little older, but she would call it bourgeois values.
Yeah, the bourgeois.
Which meant normal values.
Yes.
Like normalcy.
Yes. Yeah, no, so there were no family planning classes at the Usahabas, that's for sure. Or, I think part of that was, maybe because
it got very woke. If the audience knows what that word means.
Yeah, well, I think at some point the Usahabas definitely went in a particular agenda. They started incorporating things that were, trying to appeal to the kids of that time. and they were trying to relate to them, and so they were incorporating, like what they were dealing with in high school, or what they're going to be dealing with in college or whatever. But a lot of it is just it was just nonsense, really. It was just
He didn't even relate at all to Baba, what he taught at all.
yeah.
So even if they missed it as children, they didn't get it there either.
Yeah, and I think
The focus was sort of just
it was
strange.
distorted,
No,
yeah.
that wasn't. We weren't involved in that. It was the older people that run it. For some reason, Why do you think they did the youth service that way? Because it began because of a Margaret Bernstein, who's almost exactly my age,
Yeah.
for the same reasons. I loved her reasons. She has a son, and she didn't want him to be lonely like she was when we were kids, and she wanted him to have other Baba connections.
Yeah. No, the youth Sahabas and
But then it became kind of. So what happened? Because I never went to the youth Sahabas. My daughter did.
yeah. Well, the youth Sahabas.
It started. You were the first, just for the audience.
Yeah.
You were the first year that they had the youth Sahabas.
That was,
I think
that's right.
in 91.
91, I believe. Yeah.
And you were like 18.
No, I was younger. I would have been 15 at the time.
Wow.
15
I
at the
remember I was in Myrtle Beach, but I was much older, like I said. And now, talk about the evolution of that, because it didn't end up creating another generation of Baba lovers, which you would
Yes.
think it would.
Yes. So the context of that particular time, we're talking really the beginning of the 1990s, was a really authentic need for there to be something in the Baba world that was uniquely sort of a standalone event for kids, okay? And in this case, it was teenagers, all right? There was a need for that, and there was, because a lot of kids had, actually by that point, by the summer of 1991, a lot of kids had left Meher Baba in terms of participating in the Baba world. Already, and we started to see that in the 1980s, and there's a lot of reasons.
So that was part of the motivation.
That was part of the motivation, but also a lot of it stemmed from good experience. You see, the California group in the 80s had a very strong LA group, and they used to have this thing called the Los LA Sahabas. We used to also have a thing called, well, we still do it.
Called the what?
LA Sahabas.
Okay.
And they had.
I went to it once.
Yeah, you might have gone to it once. So my sister used to go, and I was very envious because it seemed like it was a lot of fun. And,
It was.
yeah, and they had a lot of activities for kids, and it was very interactive. And so they had some success. Like, hey, actually, like it's not like we had all these kids, right? And we're having all these divorces in the 1980s. And maybe if we can try to step out of ourselves for a few minutes and do something for the kids, because there was nothing for kids. I mean, you remember how it was. It was like, and part of that wasn't bad. Like, my experience of...
Wasn't all bad.
My experience of going and participating in the Baba world when I was young was participating almost solely in what would be called adult events, right? So that talks in Mandalay Hall or movies or so forth. But there was almost nothing just for children. There's a few things Jane would do every once in a while when we were kids, or Kitty, or
And
something
we've talked
like
about
that.
the fact that Christian churches always have tons of stuff for kids.
Always.
That's the big draw, and that's why people even go to church often.
Yes.
For their kids.
And in today's day, churches refer to themselves as a church family. So you're a family. So you play the role of a family. If you need their services, you call upon them. If you need their guidance, you go to a pastor and get counseling. If your marriage is on the rocks, there's a series of support services which are built into the institution of the church, which are there to keep people, hopefully in a healthy way, and then directed their energy towards the divine, right? So, we didn't have a lot of that in the Baba world, and then when the Mandalay passed away, we didn't have really any of it. And so, when
I was always a little envious of that, of Christians.
Yes.
That they, they have that expression, families that pray together, stay together.
Yes.
And it was like, oh, that sounds really neat.
Yes. Yeah, and so when then of course you had the rash of divorces, which became very trendy in the 1980s. You had the rise of feminism, of course in the 70s, which led to a lot of these divorces in the 1980s. You had a lot of other sort of social issues that were playing themselves out, and there was a really authentic need for Baba kids to be in the company of other Baba kids, and I was 110% supportive of that, and I remember we went to several of the early planning meetings. Our whole family was involved in it, and when the first Youth Sahabas came in 1991.
I'm going to ask you a question that's hard to answer. I'm going to ask you like statistical questions, sort of cold.
Sure.
So how many kids were there that year, and what of those do you think are like enthusiastic Baba lovers today?
So again, I was a participant, but I was a participant who also sort of was, I don't want to say a co-founder, but I was part and parcel to help setting it up as well, even as being a younger person. And so I recall, and maybe I'm off, but I want to say something like 80
That's
campers,
what I thought.
something
there were
like
about
that.
80
Yeah.
campers.
And then in the years following, the word got out, and I want to say over the course of the next decade, the numbers swelled from 80 to maybe 120 or something like that. I mean, it was in a phase of
Megan, my
growing.
daughter, was
Yeah.
chomping at the bit to go.
Yeah.
For years, it was pain. It was awful to watch. She would, I'm still not old enough. I can't
Yeah.
go.
Well, maybe
She went. She did like 5 years because you go several years and then you can be a helper.
Yes. And I think one of the takeaways from your daughter is why start something when they're 14 years old? Why not have something before? Because
Yeah, that was a little sad.
that was a little
Why?
sad.
Why? Because she went to a Girl Scout
Yeah.
camp when she was about like 11,
Yeah.
and she came home and she said that was the most fun she ever had in her whole. It was all girls.
Yeah.
It was the Girl Scouts,
Yeah.
but there were older Girl Scouts that sort of and they camped outside by a fire. She said it was the best time, with campfire stories, and I don't know, I wasn't there, but yeah.
Well, and so I think that number grew, and at some point, I want to say I went from 19.
I mean, do you know a bunch of those kids anymore?
Oh yeah, I do.
So, are they? See, quite a few of them probably are Baba lovers today because they live in Asheville. I think you've told me.
Yeah, there's a number of them that live in Asheville, but live all over the world, but predominantly in the United States, I would say, and I think, but what happens, Chris, and as you're well aware, is people disappear, right? So you don't.
I told the story that they hear Baba's God.
Yeah.
They assume Baba taught that he made the world, kind of like you see pictures online of like Jesus with the ball and was making the world, and they assumed that Baba actually said, "Who said God made the world? Your influence created the world through the impressions."
Yeah.
But you assume that then they get to a college class and they're learning about Darwin, and this suddenly is like, oh wow, this is like really logical, natural selection. I'm so well, it's time to grow up. I got to leave behind that silly. And I feel like that's how it sometimes happens. I know this happened with at least one kid because Megan told me. It was the son of Steve. He's a poet, Stephen Paul Miller, and he has a very bright son, like genius. But Megan stayed with them in New York when she was going to get residency and for a little while when she was finding an apartment, and she went out with a son, and that was his story. Was he had become a scientist, and he didn't have
that's
room for those silly ideas.
Yeah, well,
And I feel like they're not so silly, but you have to understand them in context. Baba's not.
You do, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we need to bring shaming back into the Baba world, make people feel really guilty.
About
that's one of my favorite things to do to Baba lovers, is to publicly shame them and guilt them
for their
not.
kids not being Baba lovers.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far.
They always
right away.
think I'm shaming them. I go, are your kids? Because I'm actually curious.
Yeah.
Because I'm always doing this poll.
Yeah.
And I get attacked. Like, are your kids Baba lovers?
Yeah.
No, they just assume I'm sitting there, like,
That's
are
so
your
funny.
kids Baba? I'm a Baba lover. Are your kids?
Yeah.
And I'm not. I'm just taking poll.
Yeah.
Just go no.
Well, I think we need to, make shaming great again. That's what I.
Well,
think.
my daughter's into
Yeah.
that. She's also into bullying. It's good for kids to go to school because you learn to deal with bullies.
With bullies. Well, no, I mean, I think a little bit of.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. What kind of shaming? Shaming over what?
Well, just not asking people like, hey, when like, you see, a lot of times people end up.
You didn't finish. I still want to know who's shaming who over what.
Well, I was just.
I shame people.
Yeah.
I go, tell me this because they can't, and I know they can't, and then then they're ashamed. They don't even tell me that they don't know.
Well, more of like, if you haven't seen someone in 20 years, like, where you been? What are you even doing? And like, haven't seen. Last time I saw you was at the Usahabas. Where you been for 30 years?
About shaming.
Yeah.
This is a subject we'll have to get in after a few talks. It's kind of too big for today.
It's too big.
But there's another subject that you've told me that no one's even going to believe.
Yeah.
That a lot of these Baba kids ended up working for the deep state. Now, a lot of people go, there's no such thing as the deep state. Well, then call it something else. They ended up working for, like, the CIA.
Yes, something like that.
A very large, unnatural percentage. And we don't even know why that is.
Well, we can theorize, but
Maybe the CIA it's in the book. Like, if any Baba lover kids, let them right in.
Yeah, you got to recruit them out of the Psychology 101 class, right?
No.
Pay off their student loans quickly.
You've probably told me about 20 that are in the government in kind of sketchy parts of.
Yeah. I mean, look.
Or BlackRock. And,
there was a lot of Baba kids that I would say would stay in the sphere of going to the Usahabas or staying around a Baba community, whether that was Asheville or some other place. And that existed for some time. And some of those people are still around. But a lot of them drifted away. And some of that was because, they married someone who wasn't a Baba lover. And, let's be frank.
That's one of the easiest ways to drift away from something.
Absolutely. And it's hard. It's hard. I mean, you
I knew guys, even baby boomers, that they marry a Christian woman and that's it. Because
either she says
much easier to just go with her.
You're not getting laid tonight, honey.
It wasn't going to work.
Nick this whole Baba thing. Yeah.
No, they nicked it pretty quick.
Yeah, no, they went with the coitus over God.
Yeah.
Well, so there's that, and then there's just the practicality. You start having kids, and then people are busy with their lives and this and that, and so all of a sudden you have to justify taking the kids away from.
Yeah, I have to accept that most people don't find Baba as interesting as I do, and as appealing as I do.
Yeah.
So I think, well, maybe somebody didn't explain it to them right, and I might be right to some extent, but there's all kinds of reasons.
Well, that's part of it. That is definitely part of it, and
there's different personalities.
There's different personalities.
But it is a little weird. Like, why isn't it? We can even talk about why this might not even be bad.
Well, I think you have
that in this sort of cleans before you build a house. You have to clear the lot, and this is sort of creating a whole new ground to build something else around Baba. Because I'm always talking about the future. So how can I both be talking about the future and yet have this seemingly very pessimistic view of the Baba movement? Because I don't think they're inconsistent.
So
I just think that what was
yeah.
kind of needs to pass on. It was kind of like the Summer of Love kind of Baba.
Boy, wouldn't that be nice?
The love-ins.
The love-ins, yeah. Well, we've had enough of those.
We also wanted in our agenda,
yeah.
because we've talked about these things a lot together. Let's talk about normal, the return of normal.
Well, let me share this.
Okay.
With you. So I don't know if you've seen the Tom Riley painting, of holding on to Baba on the rowboat, right? And as in the storm and the waves, right?
Yeah. There's
So
something like that.
I look at like there's the title of the book, "Stay with God," right? So,
Yeah.
or at the end of the prayer, holding on to Baba's Daman till the very end. To me, it's like you're physically holding on, and maybe these kids are getting a very naive understanding of the world in which they live in, because really, all that is true. You have to hold on for dear life, right? Because
I think so.
It's what?
I think there's a real good reason to hold on to God.
Absolutely. And so,
And hold on to normal.
Hold on
See,
to
normalcy,
yeah.
we'll have to spend a whole talk just on normalcy. Normalcy, so on one level, I think it was, and I think it might even still be, kind of the definition of what it means to be sane. You start to try to stay in the spectrum of normal. And as weird as it sounds today, a family like you going to work with two boys with normal names like Sam and Henry, that they're not exotic names. Everything about that's all normal. But a lot of people go, no, what is normal? There's no such thing as normal. No, there really is such thing as normal. Because I was a house painter and I worked in Arkansas for 16 years. And I would I did Pella windows, which were very expensive. And I would go and work for the retired lawyers and the doctors. And they all were the same. There really is a normal. They have a wife and they have grandkids. And the dad has a den. You need to get a den if you buy a house. When you buy a house.
Well, a big house, the big McMansion.
Yeah, and the den, all the furniture has to be brown, and you have to also have a moose hat on the wall.
Well, fortunately,
normal.
I'm the inheritor of all these, old Civil War relics and antiques.
By the way, the viewer might think I'm joking.
Yeah.
I am joking about the moose hat.
Yeah.
Go on, but the antiques. Tell me.
Oh no, I just I have lots of old brown. They're very out of fashion.
Where are they?
I have them stored in different places.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so through my family line, once we had a plantation essentially, but some of those still exist, and they're antique now, and so they're really old and they're brown and they're beautiful, and they're not popular in this day and age, but we've been able to hold on to them. So yeah, they'll have a nice home. But my question to you is, Chris, talk about normal. Do you have tattoos?
No.
Okay.
I don't have any tattoos, and I noticed you don't. And
do
your
not
wife
have
does
tattoos.
not.
Yes. Yes.
And your wife is how old? That's impolite to ask. Give me a rough age.
I think she's 13 or 14.
Your wife. Come on. No, she's tattoo age.
Yeah. My wife is in her.
She's like in her 30s.
Yeah, her late 30s. Yeah.
Okay. Women in their 30s.
Yeah.
All have tattoos.
Well, fortunately, see, I didn't marry an American girl.
But I don't think it's normal.
Yeah. No, I.
Oh yeah, you married a Hindu woman.
I married a woman from India. Yeah. So she's not.
She's a Baba lover though.
She's a Baba. Yes.
Her father met Baba, right?
Her father lived with Baba, actually. Yeah, at the trust. I mean, to some extent when Baba was there. So.
Let me just brag for a minute. I know this is disjointed, but it's not like film. It's real. We can film forever, and on and on. Most people have stopped watching by now because I already gave an hour talk
Really?
before this. But I'm going to play the whole thing as one. I'm going to
Well,
do
I'd be very disappointed if people stop listening to us.
Well,
Because
maybe I'll make a separate part too, so they'll jump into it. Because, but I just wanted to brag about you. I've already told them about my dad, okay, who met Baba, which I'm proud of, and it's kind of special. Kind of makes me a little bit of a celebrity. Like there's Baba pages about me.
you do come from an old, prominent Baba family.
Exactly,
Yeah,
and it's very normal.
Yes.
And I'm in Lord Maher, the biography of
Yes.
Maher Baba. Now, you, not only was your father really kind of the first to come to the center of the younger generation that's now 75, and I'm always repeating that.
Yeah.
Your sister married Baba's nephew, or his nephew's son, but what do you call that? What's the son of a nephew?
Great nephew.
It's great.
Yeah.
You are married. Wait, you are in Baba's family, or you are related to Baba by blood.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
You have a blood half sister who's married to a great nephew of Mayor Baba, who's related to Baba by blood.
yes. So
It's a little bit like this,
So
but
my
it's
sister,
still
yeah.
you are in the Baba, and your wife is related not to Baba, but to someone who lived with Baba.
yeah. So my wife's story. I mean, there's a book written about my wife's family and tells the story of her grandparents, who are now both passed, but they're finding out about Baba and following Baba and eventually living at the trust. They were, the neighbors to the Kalchori family, but there's a lot of stories there. I mean, they have a lot of personal family stories, and then a lot of historical stories that different things that they remember from the time, and some of those my father-in-law has spoken about publicly. I think tonight he's giving a talk about some of these stories, for example. But yeah, no, I've been very fortunate in that I've always been able to. Most of my life, I've been in and around the Baba Center in one form or another, and for the most part, have always participated and look forward to participating in some ways. Probably right now, I'd say I'm probably participating the least that I've ever been in my life. And part of that is just because
In the center and stuff, and Baba.
oh yeah, and part of that is just because
Well, you're busy.
I'm busy all the time. I'm
I mean,
24/7.
you're at the.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, I hope that the viewer will notice that here we have similar backgrounds, that we're really insiders in this Baba family, even if we're not included in a lot of things. It doesn't matter, we are. And yet we have these same views that you wouldn't expect us to have, such as we're very much into what's called in youth trad, which means traditional.
Yeah.
We have traditional values, and we value traditional life.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't expect that from what looks like we grew up in a cult. You did see the movie Midsummer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You did? Okay.
I
That's
don't
a frightening.
remember.
Well, that's a
much about
scary
it,
cult, but I liked watching it because it's
Yeah.
like, this is what. There's aspects to the Baba world that reminds me of that. Like that there are cultish things about it, but that's not what we want to emphasize, and that's
Yeah.
not what we want to be the future. We'd like it to be like Mayberry.
Mayberry, yeah. Well, I think that there's, there is a lot to talk about, and a lot of this, is a conversation that goes back and forth, because to understand the present, you have to understand where it came from. Like how
It
we started
also
off,
doesn't help that no one's ever talked about these things.
It's true, and so there's a lot of context. We're both.
Yeah, we could spend 3 talks just covering.
Yeah,
context.
I mean, and plus me and you, we both went to film school. We both have, a tendency for maybe too much backstory. It's just the nature
that's
of
true. No, I tend to
of being
get
a writer.
lost in backstory.
Yeah, no, my wife is
I'll
always
be
telling
back.
me,
I'm going to tell the backstory. The
You got-
backstory is even better than all
yeah,
this.
you got to limit the backstory.
Wait till you tell about my grandfather in World War One.
Well,
Now, that'll interest you.
Maybe a good title for our talks could be backstory. Or the backstory. The backstory. So, but there's a lot to talk about because you touched on like, just for example, where a lot of these young Bible kids are today. A lot of them find themselves working at the forefront of the sort of the destruction-based aspect of the empire.
Yeah, if anybody's still watching,
Yeah.
they'll be okay with that.
Yeah.
The empire,
Yeah.
meaning the Anglo-American hegemony.
Hegemony, whether that's the three-letter agencies or whatever.
The unipolar world, the end of history, America leading the world.
Yeah.
They're working for that hegemony to carry it on. Okay,
Yeah.
that's backstory too.
That's backstory too. Yeah. No, there's a lot of.
We're going through a transition that most people don't know.
We're going through a big transition.
And the Baba kids are kind of in the wrong.
The Baba kids are at the forefront of the destruction
Of the old.
Of the old.
Even
Yes.
though they're the younger generation of Baba people.
Yes. And so there's a lot to understand. There's a lot to comprehend, and there is.
The number of Baba lovers that have worked like in the White House and stuff. I could name several.
Yes.
Greg Butler's daughter was in the White House. And you've told me about people.
Was she the one in Clinton's office at that?
No, that's Monica Lewinsky.
Oh.
She wasn't a Baba lover. But
You sure she didn't go to the USA office? So, yes. So there's a lot to discuss.
look, this is a lot.
Yeah.
I'm glad you came. I'm going to cut it off now.
Okay.
And I hope you are good with this because I am. And nothing. I might kind of cover over that one word I said about from Full Metal Jacket because I noticed somebody did.
You want to stop the filming real quick?
Yeah. No. I'm going to stop for this evening because
Okay.
it's going to be so long. Because I have also this.